Hey Joy, how are you? And Mary? Hey, Danny, you went by so quickly I couldn't see what you had to say. I know. Um, can you was it really a year? Oh my God. Yeah. Naperville, Illinois. I grew up in Wheaton, Texas, Pennsylvania, Yardley, Pennsylvania. Chicago, sunny. Everett, Massachusetts. I got to tell you, it is spectacular here today. I just got off the water where I've been out for 3 hours, and I'm gonna try and get in a walk before dinner too, because it is. Yesterday was kind of. I like those days too, the rainy, cold, wet days, the dark days, but today is perfect. I was just listening to Lou Reed playing Perfect Day on coming over here and thought, yeah, you really nailed this one. By the way, sorry I'm late. As I got here, I ran into a relative who I have not seen since his wife passed, and I didn't feel like I could say, hey, and run on. I felt like I had to, give him a hug and say I was sorry. And he pointed out she was 89, but that still doesn't make it easy. All right, so here we are. You have a bunch of questions. I have not covered them as thoroughly as I normally would try to do. But let me just start from the obvious place. And that is people are asking what's going to happen in the 2024 election on November 5th. And the answer is we don't know. And so there's a couple of things to think about when you're thinking about that. And first of all, it certainly looks as if in the good polls, Vice President Kamala Harris and Minnesota Governor Tim Walz have a pretty solid 4-point lead. But of course, that doesn't really matter. What matters, I mean, it beats being the other way around, but what really matters is the swing states. And those are often, in many cases, toss ups. Now, there's a couple of things to know about the polls. I always tell you not to look at the polls, and I hold to that. I gave you those numbers just because I know people always ask. There are good polls out there, but right now they are being corrupted by a wave of bad polls. And by that, I mean, as I've talked about before, different campaigns try to use polls to change the public narrative about their campaigns. And there has been between 20 and 25 new polling companies on the right that are now saying that Trump is winning. And they're just not real polls. They're trying to change the narrative. So if you pay attention to them, you're going to get all upset. And they're not real. They're trying to make you upset and make you give up. And the person to watch, as I always say, is Tom Bonnier. And I follow him on Twitter. You do not have to sign up for Twitter to read Twitter. I think he's also on the other sites as well. And he's very good about breaking down the polls and saying, this one is believable, this one is not. Now, one of the things I'm once again going to urge you to do, and that is to play the other side of the table instead of sitting there thinking, what should I be doing? What's next for us? Look and see what your opponents are doing. And because I am fervently in the Democratic camp for this particular election, that means in my case, I watch to see what the Republicans are doing. Now, one of the things you will have seen, or maybe have not seen, but the Republicans have put a huge sum of money right now into Pennsylvania, Ohio, and Montana. And those seem to me to be a sign that they are very concerned about holding those Senate seats, because those Senate seats are key to maintaining control or to getting control of the Senate. And so even though those polls look like real toss-ups in those states, the fact that the Republicans are pouring money into them is, I think, a sign. And in Montana and Ohio as well, the Republican Senate candidates have gone to ground. I mean, they've got bad stories breaking about them, and they're simply doing everything they can to avoid the media. So always look at the other side and see where the money is going. And as you know, Elon Musk is also pouring money all over the country into the Republican coffers. And people have asked if what he is doing is legal. I am not an elections lawyer. I'm not a lawyer of any sort, so I'm not going to comment on that. But I would be surprised if somebody wasn't taking a pretty close look at it, because there are laws about how much money you can put into elections, and there are laws about doing things like buying votes. And he's looking like he's right up against the edge there. And he has in public made a comment about how if Trump loses, he is effed. which suggests he at least feels like he's skating too close to the edge in a number of places. All right, so if we go with that, hey, Emma, are you back in America? I just saw that go by. So if that's the playing the other side of the table, and what you should look for and what you should worry about, those things are all, I think, that's one way to think about trying to imagine what's happening going forward. But then there are a couple of other things as well. As I always say to you, those people who think they are going to lose are the ones who try to suppress the vote. Like that's a given. And I don't really have to explain that. It's pretty obvious. If you think people like what you're going to do, you're like, yeah, let's go vote because you're going to vote for me. But if you think people are turning against you, you want to suppress the vote. And if you look at the Republican strategy in this election, it is to stop everybody from voting. I mean, that's been their whole MO. They've been suing to get drop boxes closed, to have shorter voting hours, to throw people off the rolls. That suggests that they know what they want to do is, very unpopular. All right, so a couple of things about that. One, I think, is the most important to remember, and that is really interesting. And that's kind of a horrible thing for me to say. It's interesting as somebody who studies the American political system. We are in a unique moment because, as I've said for a long time, Trump was not trying to win the popular vote. He was trying to whip up people to fight for him. And he still is trying to do that. If you're listening to his rallies and so on, you look and you see that he is trying to whip people up to fight for him. And yet, he has shifted, I think, into something altogether new. And that has happened with Hurricane Helene. And that is, he is running a disinformation campaign. And that's, hold that thought, because that's not the same as political spin. Like every politician spins, that's just what they do. This is, instead of trying to attract voters by basing an argument in reality, Trump is very clearly launching something that is called disinformation. And that's not a mistake, that's lies. It's a bundle of lies, a lot of lies, so that you throw it at people and they don't know what to do. They don't know which end is up. They start to fight over things, and they end up losing their grip on reality. And when they lose their grip on reality, they turn against each other or they walk away from the political system. It's a technique. It's a political technique. It is one that other countries have used. We have never seen it in the United States before, at least at this with a major political candidate. This idea of creating a false reality, and it's an idea that has been theorized in Russia, although I've always suspected that there was at least one American political operative at work in it, because it looks like it's got his fingerprints on it. But the idea is to create such confusion that people want either a strong man to lead them out of it. They turn and they start fighting against each other, or they simply say, they're all cheaters, they're all lying, and they walk away. Now, in case of Hurricane Helene, even the Republican governors and mayors and officers in the affected states have been saying the Federal Emergency Management Agency and the administration have been doing a great job. I mean, there isn't a one of them who has said anything but that. And yet, Donald Trump, J.D. Vance, Ron DeSantis has actually said Biden's doing a good job. The Trump campaign has insisted the opposite. They've spread all kinds of lies that, for example, if you accept FEMA help, the government will take your property, which is complete crap. I mean, they've had, and then there's one person posting on Twitter who's talking about how there's actually people at war in Western North Carolina and so on. And that is a deliberate disinformation campaign. And it's being dramatically amplified by foreign accounts. So, I am swarmed right now with people screaming at me for saying that FEMA is doing a good job. And mind you, I'm not on the ground. I'm not observing what's there. What I do is I look at the sources of people who are there, and then I give you a list of those sources so you can read them and you can say, oh, I trust this organization, but I don't trust this one. Although that being said, let me go down a little bit further into that rabbit hole. Somebody asked me once, you know, how do I know my sources are any better than Joe saying it from the top of a mountain? And the answer to that, once again, is there is no penalty for lying in the United States. You can lie, you can say anything you want, except in certain cases. So one of the reasons that I rely on government documents is you can't lie in those. You can certainly express your opinion, but there's actual penalties for lying to the government. And so those tend to be reliable documents. That is, people will slant things their own way, but it's not deliberate disinformation. In the United States of America, it could be in other countries, but in our country, you can't lie to Congress. You can't lie in official documents. Or rather, you can, but then you run the risk of going to jail. And that is the sort of source that I use, or the kind of narrators who have fact checkers or who have reason, I think, to have legitimacy. So, for example, I quoted last night in one of my letters from a person who'd been a very well-known meteorologist in Florida for more than 30 years. I am operating under the assumption that if he was not good at his job, he would have been thrown out. And I actually looked him up, figured out who he was. There were no complaints if somebody said this was crap. I posted something by somebody else that was a storm chaser originally in last night's letter. Looked him up, found out he was not trained. He was a young man who was not trained, even though he had quite a long list of followers. And I took that down. I would not put that out in public. So one of the things that you will see is people screaming about how, no, FEMA's really not doing anything good or whatever, but they don't have sources. Screaming at me or screaming at somebody else is worth absolutely nothing unless you are able to say, look, here's the budget for this police department, and it says right on it that they are funding, I don't know, attack dogs, or I'm making this up, but you want people to have sources. Okay, so Trump is running this this disinformation campaign, which is, like I say, it's not spin, it's something different. He's trying to create a false world. So he's lying about the economy, and that's really important that he's lying about the economy, because he's trying to convince people to put him in charge so he will do a better job than what is happening out there. But the truth is, the Biden administration is doing a bang up job. That's not to say they've gotten everything right, but the economy is booming. The FEMA response has been extraordinary. The pieces that people care about in their lives are going really well. So he's got to convince people that that's wrong and that, in fact, America is a hellscape. And one of the ways he's doing that is by using being amplified by foreign trolls, bots and trolls, and by doing the same thing in the United States. And we know, for example, that the Tenet media out of Tennessee was being funded by the Kremlin, by Russian operatives, and those influencers were putting out the pro Putin talking points and so on. So that's what's going on in this election. Is Trump is trying to create this false reality, and the Republican Party under his control is trying to keep people from voting against their interests. They're trying to get them to vote for Trump. Now, all that being said, he seems troubled. That is, he is increasingly angry. He is increasingly unable to finish a sentence. He's increasingly unable to manage a crowd. He used to be very good at handling a crowd. He is not anymore. And he is no longer doing interviews, and except occasionally very positive interviews, but he just did an interview with Laura Ingraham, and she was trying desperately to get him to say that he would not go after his enemies, and he wouldn't do it. He made it pretty clear that he's intending to go after his enemies if he wins. So he's doing things like that, and that has raised another question that you've asked. I feel like I'm sort of free associating, because normally I have notes and today I don't. Another question that you have asked is about JD Vance invoking the 25th Amendment when if they get elected. And my answer to that, I'm being philosophical today. My answer to that is always think the easiest way you can. That is, Vance doesn't need to do that. I mean, we know Trump doesn't want to do any work. He didn't do any work when he was in office 4 years ago. He wants to watch Fox News and have people kowtow to him. That's what he wants. He wants to make money. He wants to watch Fox News and he wants to hear people saying nice things about him. You can set him up in a room off the Oval Office. There's a little dining room where he watched the attack, the January 6th attack on the U.S. Capitol. It's quite small. I'm looking around this house, and it's a small. It's room for a dining table basically, and it's got a giant TV on the wall. And you could just set him up in there off the Oval Office and say, Mr. President, we're going to need you really badly at 4 o'clock. So you just take it easy until then. And then you could walk off and run the whole country while he's watching TV. So do I think they're going to 25th him? Why bother? Yeah, I wouldn't. I would just say, "Oh, we could not do it without you," and then go ahead and run the country anyway. And I think you have to assume that that's what's going to happen, because JD Vance pretty clearly is the candidate of Trump's children and of the tech bros out of California who want to destroy democracy and set in place their fantasy of technology. So I wouldn't lose any sleep over the 25th. I think before you even get to that, I think you have to lose sleep over JD Vance. So a lot of this is we're in this kind of really weird, like a lot of this we've never dealt with before, and so on. I'm trying to watch your comments as well as what's going on. Oh, one of the things that actually I'll come back to that. I want to go next to Kamala Harris and Tim Walz, because there's an asymmetry in the way we're looking at this election. That is, Trump and JD Vance have said so many incredibly outrageous things as part of this disinformation campaign that they would have been absolute campaign enders in any other era in America, even in 2016. And the fact that they're just going for it, and they're really going for it, trying to create this incredibly destabilized world, even though it is literally going to kill people who are not responding to emergency services, despite the fact they're being caught in these hurricanes, which the sheer evil of that still boggles my mind. And I have thoughts about that are only my personal thoughts, so maybe I won't bother to share them. But we've got that going on. And a lot of papers seem unable to grapple with that. Like, what do you do about the fact that Trump yesterday embraced Nazi race science, which is to say that people have genes that are either good genes or bad genes, and that the people who have bad genes we need to get rid of? That's a whole factory of red flags for anybody who knows anything about politics, or any kind of a system that has turned on its own, is to say, well, those people are just inherently bad and these are inherently good. That's really bad stuff. And by the way, it was big in America in the 1990s to the 1920s, which is kind of the era that Trump seems to identify with. But the New York Times, I don't think, even mentioned that he said that, which is mind-boggling, because I think there's so much they start to feel like they're just picking on him. And I got to tell you, honestly, I have that problem, that it's so extreme that I've actually written a letter for tonight. I hadn't intended to. And because I felt like there was stuff I had to talk about. And when I started to write it down, it just looks like I'm going after the man. And then I'm like, I'm literally quoting people. This literally happened. And so we've got that over there. And then we've got Vice President Kamala Harris and Minnesota Governor Tim Walz, both very accomplished legislators, lawmakers, running a normal campaign. And so it's kind of like apples and moon rocks. I mean, it's like you can't even really, they're not even in the same, there's no way to even put them in the same conversation. So, in many ways, I think the press is focusing on Harris and Walz and asking about things like their policies, because that would be a normal thing to do. But while they're asking Harris and Walz about their policies, and when Walz misspeaks about when he was in China during the Tiananmen Square summer, that's kind of a normal conversation. And they just sort of say, oh, that's Trump, we're not going to deal with Trump on the other side, which makes it very, very difficult for people to make, I think, good decisions. Now, you asked about how Walz Harris did in the 60 Minutes interview. Let me step back a little bit before that. One of the things that I think is going on here is that, here, meaning in this moment, is that we are looking at dramatic changes in a number of American systems, and one of those is in media. So there has been real anger among the American media, the legacy media, that Harris and Walz have spent less time doing interviews with them than they have done other interviews. And that is, there's a number of reasons for that. One of the first reasons for that is that it's not necessarily a good use of the principal's time, because the people who watch 60 Minutes already know how they're going to vote. That's there. You're not going to reach a new audience there, and this is going to be a turnout election. But also because of that asymmetry I mentioned, that if Walz or Harris says something in an interview that can be picked apart, the media will. It'll become a headline story. While Trump is over there talking about embracing the Nazis, the Nazi race theory, and it's not getting any coverage. So, in part, I think it's a function of the fact that the media doesn't know how to deal with Trump even still, and as a result, is trying to focus on Harris and Walz, and that makes them very vulnerable. But I think there's also something else going on, and that is that the Harris campaign, I think, has done a terrific job of recognizing that we are in a new political moment and of really embracing that new political moment. You know, I was at the Democratic National Convention, and to me, one of the most striking moments was when DJ Cassidy turned the roll call, which is deadly dull, into a dance party. That was a sign that politics was changing. And so, in terms of Harris's response to 60 Minutes, which I did not watch all of, I've watched clips of, but I took last night off largely. I was really much more impressed, to the point that Buddy got sick of hearing me talking about it, I'm sure, with Alex Cooper's interview of her on Call Her Daddy. And that was just so interesting because I don't know about you, but I'd never heard of Call Her Daddy. And it's like the second most popular podcast in the country. I'd heard a lot about Joe Rogan. I'd never actually heard a Joe Rogan podcast. But if you'd said to me, hey, do you know anything about Joe Rogan? I could have given you his numbers. I could have said that, there was a big fight over him going on to Spotify. I mean, I knew who he was. There was sort of this ambient noise about him. I'd never heard any ambient noise about Call Her Daddy. And it's the second most popular podcast in the country, which just suggests to me that there remains a bias in our media, which, of course, if you're listening to me, you know exists. But if you listened to that interview, and I didn't listen to the whole thing, I listened to most of it, it was really interesting because the legacy media, when it interviews somebody, it's adversarial I don't think 60 Minutes was this way, by the way, but if you listen to the White House press corps, for example, it's a constant gotcha. Can I get you to say something that will give me a headline, even if it's just you misspeaking? And I just find that deadly dull because so much of what they are asking is widely available in press releases, in reports, in all kinds of places you can find it. So I don't find that interesting. But what Cooper did on Call Her Daddy is she really had discussions with her. They talked about stuff. And I felt like that gave me a much better picture of Kamala Harris than I had ever had before. And I know her papers, I know the reports, I've watched a lot of videos of her. because I got very curious about her early on in the Biden administration, and I had a pretty good sense, I thought, of what made Biden tick, but I wasn't clear about what made Harris tick. And I actually asked people to send me a bunch of things they thought were representative. So I watched all the videos and I read all the speeches, and I thought I had a pretty good idea of her. Listening to her talk to a younger woman about issues of reproductive health care, for example, it just was deeper. I felt like there was more that surprised me in that medium than ever surprises me when people ask her gotcha questions. So, for example, in the 60-minute interview, he pushed her to talk about immigration, and she gave an answer that was fine, but I had a very different idea about why the Biden administration has handled immigration the way it has, and it did not. It's not what she said, and if I were writing about that, I would absolutely present my theory, because I think I could have citations and everything, and I felt like that would be different than asking her, for example, to talk about the administration's Los Angeles protocol, which is a huge deal that got almost no press. I've written about it a few times, but the migrant deal out of Los Angeles in 2017, I think it was. Anyway, so in terms of her 60 minutes interview, that felt like she kind of had to do it because it's a 50-year tradition, and they're serious. It's a good interview, but her job right now is not really to be a traditional candidate, because that will open her up to people saying, well, that policy, there's 2.10% of whatever, and that would be exactly how we should be talking against a normal candidate. But when literally the other candidate is threatening to go after his enemies and become a dictator, it feels a little bit bonkers for Harris to be trying to present very detailed policies, although she has, of course, had a very detailed economic policy. She's got an 82-page economic policy out there, but I've summarized it a bunch of times. You've heard about it. I mean, she did that again, but it's pretty anodyne. I mean, like it's almost a Republican policy as it is. So anyway, so she has been focusing not on the legacy media, and I think for good reason, because she can go around the legacy media to people like Alex Cooper, where she has the potential to reach brand new audiences who are not watching 60 Minutes and who are watching or listening to Call Her Daddy, I guess watching in that case. And she did that this morning. She went on Howard Stern's show. Again, great way to do outreach with people who otherwise might not have heard of her or might not feel that it's worth getting behind her. So I think you're going to see a lot of that, and a lot of the legacy media is talking about it as if it is her ignoring them or ignoring the people. I would make the opposite argument, that it's her recognizing a new press moment, a new kind of press, and working with the new generation. And so far, I've been really, really impressed with the interviews she has done in those alternative places. As I say, not necessarily because of her, although I think she does a beautiful job with them. I don't know why everybody thought she was not going to interview well. The woman was freaking brilliant as a senator, and she's a prosecutor. She's always been extremely well spoken. When people say that she, every once in a while she speaks, and all over Twitter people say, oh, word salad. And I'm like, that's because you are clearly not able to understand it when somebody puts a clause inside a verbal sentence. Trump speaks at a very low level. She speaks at a very high level. When you embed clauses in a sentence, that's actually a lot of work to do. So anyway, that's her, and as much as I can say on 60 Minutes. Now, a couple of other things. I want to call your attention today to, she did The View, as somebody points out. She was great on The View. She's much better. It's just the whole adversarial system in media seems to me to be extremely useful when you have a leader who is lying to you. Richard Nixon, for example. But if somebody is actually trying to communicate, the adversarial system, I think, closes doors more than opens them. And that's actually, one of the things that I do when I interview people is it's a funny. I've been thinking a lot about this since I watched the Caller Daddy interview, because I always say to people, think of yourself as a guest in my classroom. So I'm going to try and draw out as much of you as I possibly can to inform my students or my audience if I'm doing it nowadays. And that means that I'm going to press you on things, but not because I'm trying to trip you up, because I want to hear more. And then at the end of that interview, I'm not going to say, you're a horrible person or whatever, but I am going to expect that my students or my audience is going to have issues. They're not going to say, oh, wow, that person's brilliant. I love everything they said. But I trust my audience or my students to make good decisions about what they heard. And that to me seems a much more useful kind of interview of a politician than trying to have a gotcha, which just as I say, just doesn't seem very valuable to me. All right, so now back to other stuff that you asked about. One of the things that I think is really important to remember is somebody just asked why the legacy media seems to go after Harris and not Trump. And, sometimes people say it's because they're owned by Trumpers. Other people say it's because they like clicks. I don't know. I'm not in those editorial offices. I have guesses, but I actually think it probably has to do with the media model, sort of a dying media model, to be honest. And the fact that we now have alternative media that people can turn to so that they don't have to listen to those to the people we listened to in 2016, I think is a very healthy thing. And there are a number of new voices out there that have millions of followers. I'm one of them, but so does Brian Tyler Cohen. He is a quite literally on the left. I am not. No, he's not on the left. He's a progressive, is what he is. I am a historian, so I don't really follow those categories, but there's a lot of other places you can hear stuff. All right, back to the election. If you have not noticed, and I can't imagine you have not, the vitriol and the hatred from MAGA politicians and their followers is off the charts. It is off the charts. And I would urge you to think about that as a reflection of their recognition that what they are trying to do is extremely unpopular. So that old saying, a dying mule kicks hardest, is very true. And especially the responses over Hurricane Helene are, I think, designed to destabilize and undermine American society. If we can't even agree on helping our fellow Americans who have been completely unexpectedly whacked by an unprecedented hurricane, then what can we agree on? And that is, I think they are quite cynically trying to tear us apart, even over something as basic as that. And the going forward into this election, I think you have to recognize that that's a lot of what's going on, is this attempt to divide American society so that people will turn to Trump. Now, that being said, once again, they wouldn't be doing it if they didn't think they had to do it. And there's a new study out today that shows that basically social media is sort of poisoned. We know between 20 and 30% of everything we see on social media is seeded there by Iran, China, or Russia. Mark Kelly of Arizona, Senator of Arizona, who sits on the Senate Intelligence Committee, said that yesterday. Great example. That's somebody I would trust. He sits on the Senate Intelligence Committee, and that's a big deal to sit on the Senate Intelligence Committee. They take their jobs very seriously on that committee. The House it depends on who's in charge of it, but the Senate Intelligence Committee is kind of the gold standard. I'm not saying you can't ever have a rotter on there, but Kelly is a military man. He's not going to come out and lie about something like that, in my opinion. So we know that that is 20 to 30% of it is foreign intervention. And then a study today about X says that only about 3% of the accounts on X produce almost all of the content, which I think is really interesting, and that the real trolls, the nasty, horrible people, that all comes from a very small group of the accounts on Twitter. So basically, there's people seeding hatred and hoping that people are going to jump on it. One of the reasons I always say to you on my page, do not answer the trolls, we will zap them, is because they're almost certainly not real. And if they are real, pity them and move on, because you're just giving them the engagement that gets them clicks and gets them a higher pay. So, and that's quite deliberate on X, by the way, because if you're getting a lot of interaction, you can actually be paid for people to put their ads near the pieces that are near the things that are getting a lot of interaction. So if you say something hateful and awful, and people keep arguing with you, that person can get paid because they'll put an ad near it. I mean, there's one of the things that's going to happen in the future is X is going to have to get cleaned up. Anyway, hey, thanks. You guys figured out it's my birthday. Yeah, I'm 62 years old today. So going into this election, then remember that this is a deliberate tactic to destabilize us, to make us angry at each other, and it's a tactic that they are using to try to undermine what's happening in the election. So people have asked me, what can you say to your your brother who's a MAGA? And the answer to that is actually, I think, going to be a bit of a surprise. I have said to you before that you kind of got to think about it as somebody who's in an abusive relationship. And the more that you say to them, hey, he's not treating you right, the closer they cling. But actually, somebody wrote to me the other day, and I kind of went down a rabbit hole, and the comparison they made was to a cult, to somebody who's in a cult, and why somebody would join a cult. And it made a lot of sense to me in terms of politics, the answers to that. There's a lot of people who study cults, and if you're interested in it, you should look, you can Google why do people join cults and read some of the stuff that people put in there, because one of the first things they say is that the people who are most vulnerable to cults are people who feel like they're not in control of their lives. They're marginalized people in some way. And joining a cult makes them feel like they know stuff, like they're in control of their lives. And the worst thing that you can do to try and get somebody out of that situation is to say, you're an idiot. You're wrong in all these ways, because it just makes them cling more tightly to the idea that they really are right. And I'm not a deprogrammer at all, but I thought that was a really interesting point. And the other piece of that is that it makes them feel like they belong, and it makes them feel like they know stuff, like they're really in control of something. And the more you bang on that head on, the more you convince them just to cling more tightly. So I wouldn't argue with your MAGA brother or your MAGA sister. It's just gonna frustrate both of you. And we know that in any right-wing movement, it's going to have a ceiling of about 33% of the population. More usually it's down in the 20s, but a ceiling of the 30s. Those are not the people we need to get out voting in this election. With luck, we can get some of them to stay home. The people we need to get out voting in this election are those people who aren't paying attention. Those are reachable. I talked to a guy the other day who said he was voting for Trump. And we got talking. I mean, I don't argue. I don't talk politics, actually, outside of my job. And he asked me, he said, who are your favorite presidents? And that's like catnip to me, right? So I said, well, I got to go with Lincoln. I just got to go with Lincoln. And I said, and Washington's pretty high on my list too, because giving up power is a really big thing. And I said, how about you? And he said, Reagan. That's why I'm a Republican. That's why I'm voting for Trump, is I like Reagan. And I thought, this man is checked out. He was smart. He was nice. But he doesn't think about politics. He's reachable. People who aren't paying attention are reachable. People who might not be registered to vote are reachable. People who think it doesn't matter to them are reachable. Your MAGA sister is not reachable. So don't waste your time and energy there. All right, so the the I'm trying to think of other questions you asked here. Um, yeah, I don't like Thomas Jefferson. Um, um, I did the hurricanes. So people have asked why are things still so close? I think that's it. I really do. There are certainly some people who really firmly believe in MAGA, but I think and or racist and sexist and they want to do harm. But I think a lot of people just like the club and they like feeling like they know something. And I think they also like the idea that they matter, that you're not the boss of me. And I can throw sand in the gears. Even if I can't run the machine, I can throw sand in the gears. So, in terms of there's one other piece I wanted to tell you about today, and that was the reason I wrote a letter today. I was going to take the day off. I take my birthday off and I take Thanksgiving off. And this year I did not take my birthday off. So, I'm going to have to find a different day to take off. But, and by the way, on that front, that makes it sound like I work all the time. That's not the truth. And I want to actually call this out because people often worry. And my theory in life is that if you try and add in the nice meals, the books, the vacations, the work, all that is extras, it never gets done. So, like today, I took a 3-hour kayak because I always try and every day, I can't always, but I cook a lot. We always eat well because why wouldn't we? That is, I'm not going to wait and go out to dinner once a month. I'm going to make nice food every day. And I always try and see my friends. And although I haven't been able to do that this year, I always try to do those things and incorporate them into my life because I feel like if you put it aside and say, I'm going to take a vacation, then you might have broken a rib like I did in August. Right? You don't get to do it or whatever. You have to have your vacation every single day and you have to have your nice meals every single day. And you have to tell your husband you love him every single day and your children and so on, because otherwise you might not ever get to it. So anyway, the reason I wrote today when I didn't plan to was because there is a new story out today based in a book by Bob Woodward, who it's coming out on the 15th in a week. And CNN and I think Washington Post got their hands on it early. And there's a number of things in it that are really interesting. And I wrote about this one, but I'll tell you a little bit about what it says with about Biden too. It says that Trump has been in close contact with Vladimir Putin since he left office. He's called him, allegedly called at least 7 times. And there's no reason for a former president to be chatting with somebody who is, an enemy of the United States. There's no role there. And gave him, Vladimir Putin, COVID machines to test for COVID in the beginning of the pandemic when there weren't enough for Americans, and also that MBS, Mohammed bin Salman, the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, has a burner phone for Trump. Apparently, he does a lot of his work for through burner phones. And if you don't know, a burner phone is one that can't be traced to you. I don't actually know how I guess you put minutes on them. I don't know how that works. My life in crime has not yet begun. But most of us don't need burner phones. He's got a burner phone that goes straight to Trump. And Trump came out absolutely swinging today and furious about this story. Oh my God, it's not true. But, I think we have reason to think it is true. And if you remember, there is the reason we have to think it is true is how many contacts Trump had with Putin in ways that seemed untoward at best, both before he was in office, when he and his sons said that most of their financing came from Russia, and during his term when he seemed unusually obsequious to Putin. And I keep thinking about those documents, those national security documents that are a lot of them unaccounted for even still. So Ed Luce of the Financial Times, who is British, wrote on X this afternoon, what on earth business does a former president have talking to Vladimir Putin 7 times? And the answer to that is nothing good, first of all. And second of all, these missing documents, one of which was the material that the government had collected about the interference of the Russians in the 2016 election. Um, that's a that's I could not let that go by and not comment on that. That's a really big deal. So we'll see what kind of coverage it gets. I know it was in a number of places, but anyway, back to this election. You have asked what you can do in this election and what's going to happen after it. And right now, it's always give money if you can, but it's actually getting pretty late for that. The last financials have closed and for a lot of campaigns. What campaigns really need right now is door knockers, because as I say, this is going to be an election based on turnout, and people need to hear. We need to flood the zone with good information. So the Trump team is flooding the zone with poop, as Steve Bannon puts it, although that's not his word. We need to flood the zone with good information. And the way to do that for candidates is by knocking on doors, by spreading those cards that team that I've been advertising on my Facebook page for that team, by getting out the word, by posting on social media, by sharing my letters, which are free, by the way, by writing letters to the editor. You need to get that information out to as many people as you possibly can. Make sure that people are registered, that your friends and family are registered, because so many people have been knocked off the registration lists. This is the time when, in order to change the direction of the ship of state, we need to blanket the country with good information, solid, real information. And that's also the down ballot races. And it's worth going to the States Project. There's a whole number of places that are trying to turn out people in the down ballot races, which are crucially important. And they're crucially important for 2 reasons. First of all, because that's where the most of the decisions about the way you will live your life will be made, is at the state and local level. But second of all, because if in fact, in a number of states, I'm actually on my way down to North Carolina next week to try and break the supermajority there, because the Republicans redistricted the state in such a way that they've had a supermajority, which means that they can veto what the Democratic governor does. And that's, that says something right there. In a statewide election, the Democrats win, but the state is so badly gerrymandered that the Republicans have a supermajority in the legislature. So I'm going down there to help some really terrific candidates get elected to the state offices, because that just breaking that, they're not going to win the state, they're not going to win control of the legislature, but they can break that supermajority, which will start to give them at least a veto over the crazy stuff that the legislature has been doing. Tennessee, same thing. So if you're in any of those states, that matters. But here's another reason it matters. It matters because if you can turn out people in those down ballot races who might not otherwise turn out, that is, they go to turn up and vote for some of the candidates in a district that they're not going to win, they know they're not going to win, they tend to vote up the ballot as well. And that gives you a much higher turnout for senator, for representative, and for president and vice president. And that really matters. So in terms of your voices right now, that's what matters, is for you to get people. We know talking one-on-one is the most effective thing you can do. Talking to somebody who trusts you is the most effective thing you can do to affect this election. And this is the time to do it. And as I say, pay attention to the down ballot races as well as the up ballot races, and look for for races in your area where you think you can make a difference. Now, one of the people that I have called out here on my Facebook page is Monica Tranel in Montana, she's great. She doesn't have a lot of money. She's running against Ryan Zinke. Ryan Zinke was the Interior Secretary for Donald Trump, who was so corrupt he had to leave the Trump organization. And that to me is a no-brainer of a race. It's a toss-up. And what she needs, as I say, is not so much money, although money's always an important thing. She needs people to knock on doors and to create this sense of excitement and of a community that can carry her over that line. People aren't turning out for Zinke, but she needs people to carry her over the line. She calls them her aunties, which is why I advertise them on this Facebook page, is because that's kind of what we are, right? We're aunties and uncles saying, we can help you over this line. McCormick, the woman running for governor in Indiana against Braun, she's great. That's another place she could use some aunties. She could use people knocking on doors. Find your own races like that look like they need help, and put your voice in there. And that's a really effective thing to do right now. Now, that being said, you are probably going to be completely freaked out between now and I think it's 27 days. I actually haven't been counting. And I'm always freaked out. And I don't think she's watching today, but I got to give my friend Michelle a shout out, because every time I'm like, this is it, we're all going to hell in a handbasket, she talks me off the ledge. And I could not live without that. Everybody needs a Michelle in their life to talk them off the ledge. It's going to get even worse. It's going to be terrible. We're going to have, if you look at just what has happened over Hurricane Helene, where our fellow Americans are hurting so very badly. And now we've got Milton hitting Florida tomorrow. The craziness is going to be bad for the next 27 days, and we're all going to be exhausted. So cut yourself a break where you can, get friends, recognize, take deep breaths. Recognize that this is a real attempt to destabilize us, and that it's not just about, I like my candidate. It is literally an attempt to undermine American democracy and tune it out. I have gotten to the point where I'm not reading the hate mail. Not the stuff that is, screaming at me about FEMA. There's no point. Why would I poison myself with that? And I feel like you should give yourselves the right to do that. Because on the other side of this, we don't know what's going to happen. It could be a blue wave. One of the things that Tom Bonnier pointed out the other day is that the vote share in Pennsylvania, I'm pretty sure it was, looks very much like the 2022 election, which is very good news for the Democrats. That's why I follow him, as he puts that stuff out there. The Democrats could get everything. Or Harris could win the popular vote by a lot and still lose in the Electoral College. Or the Republicans could get the Senate. Or, because it's a bad year for the Democrats because they have so many seats up. Any number of these things could happen. But here's what I can tell you. I can tell you that even if everything goes as we wish, the MAGA movement is not going to go away. We need to be in this for the long haul. And when I say in this, I don't mean knocking on doors and all that. I mean, we are in the process of creating a new United States of America. And as I look at things like Call Her Daddy, which I'd never heard of, and I'm not going to be a regular, it's not really I'm not the demographic. I looked at that incredibly articulate, smart young woman doing that interview, and I thought, the kids are all right. And if you think about what we could create going forward, and what we must create, looking at Hurricane Helene and Hurricane Milton, and recognizing that global change is here. It's not in the future anymore. It is here. If you saw that newscaster, the meteorologist, choking up as he was talking about Milton and sort of saying, I don't even know what to do with this. It's here. We must deal with it. And when you think about having to do that and recognizing that it is an opportunity and not simply a fear, the future could be great. And most importantly, even after November 5th, it will be unwritten. and we're the ones who get to write it. So try and take a deep breath. Try and recognize that this election is going to happen and there's going to be a day that comes after it. And recognize that this movement that we have built, people like us, is not going to end on November 6th. We've made great friends. We have new ideas. We have new connections, and that's going to carry forward. So let's focus on that and get out there, get the vote out, cross our fingers. I think the top of the ticket is running great. I'm looking at our vulnerable Senate seats, people like John Tester is running a great campaign. Sherrod Brown and both of their opponents have crashed and burned, although they're still running strong in those states. The momentum is there right now for the people who are trying to protect democracy. And I want to just one more time say, most of the people in this movement are big D Democrats, but that's not this election. This is pro small d democracy versus authoritarianism, pro fact versus lies, that disinformation, pro America versus pro authoritarians. And in that pro democracy movement, not only are independents and Republicans welcome, they are necessary because they are going to be the people against whom all the democratic ideas are going to butt up and come out with better ideas going forward. So let's remember that, and remember that we actually do have the chance now to win the election and also to carry this country forward to something new and exciting. And with that, I'm going to finish tonight's letter, and then I'm going to go for a walk on this beautiful day. And then I am going to have the spaghetti sauce I made this afternoon and the spice cake. And with luck, I'm going to get to bed early tonight. And that will be a wonderful birthday. Thank you for being here to share it with me. I'll talk to you later.